Number 8. The Goldfish Funeral Enthusiast. Picture this: you're 7 years old, wearing a paper crown from Burger King, standing solemnly over a shoebox that contains Mr. Bubbles, your deceased goldfish. You're delivering a heartfelt eulogy about how he loved swimming in circles while your mom is filming on her chunky camcorder. Cute, right? Well, maybe. Here's the weird part. Psychologists have found that kids who never, ever care when a pet dies, or who giggle during the goldfish funeral, might be missing a certain key ingredient called empathy. That's kind of a big deal in the whole not turning into a sociopath department. Now don't panic if your child didn't bawl over a hamster. Kids develop empathy at wildly different rates. Some are born as tiny Dalai Lamas, others need until middle school to realize that other people have feelings. But studies on child development suggest that complete apathy toward death or suffering, especially when combined with things like lying without guilt or seeming eerily calm when everyone else is sad, is a little, let's say, on brand for psychopathy's early signs. In the developing brain, there's this whole empathy circuitry, areas like the amygdala and ventromedial prefrontal cortex, and if those systems are underactivated, emotional learning gets stunted. It's like upgrading to Windows Vista and then wondering why nothing runs right. The takeaway? If your childhood self was the kid casually poking the dead goldfish with a pencil and asking if you could have pizza now, you might have been on the yikes end of the empathy spectrum, or maybe you just really hated that fish. But either way, that moment was a free little preview of whether you'd grow up to be a shoulder to cry on, or a future villain in a Netflix documentary. Number 7. Tiny Serial Liar Syndrome. You know that moment when a kid swears up and down that they didn't eat the cookies, while their face is literally covered in crumbs, and their breath smells like a Chips Ahoy factory exploded in their mouth? That's normal. What's less normal is when lying becomes the go-to, no-guilt default setting for everything. Here's the thing, all kids lie. In fact, lying is a milestone in cognitive development. When a toddler tells you they didn't spill the juice, that's actually their prefrontal cortex doing jazz hands, showing it can imagine alternate realities. But research shows that a subset of kids don't just experiment with fibs, they live in them. These kids lie without hesitation, without that telltale awkward shuffle, and most importantly, without the faintest whiff of remorse when they're caught. In psychology, that combo, chronic dishonesty plus no guilt, is one of the behavioral warning lights for what's called callous unemotional traits, and those traits, in turn, are a solid predictor for antisocial personality disorder later in life. Basically, your brain has a built-in, oops, that was wrong alarm system, but in these kids, it's like someone cut the wires and duct taped over the siren. So while little Timmy insisting the dog did his math homework is hilarious at 6, by 16, that same brain pattern could turn into, it wasn't me, officer, with slightly higher stakes. Number 6. The Destroyer of Toys. Ah yes, the kid who can't just play with a doll, they must surgically remove its head, an arm, and possibly all its internal stuffing. Or the one who takes a brand new toy car and immediately tests how many times it can be slammed into the wall before it shatters into satisfying plastic confetti. Now before you panic, a little destructive play is just curiosity. Kids want to see how things work. But when destruction becomes the only form of play, especially paired with zero interest in fixing things or remorse afterward, it can be a psychological red flag. Studies link early repetitive destruction of property, including toys, furniture, and that one cousin's Lego masterpiece, to later patterns of aggressive or antisocial behavior. Why? Because play is how kids practice real-world social rules. If you repeatedly destroy instead of cooperate, you're training your brain to seek thrill and control and chaos rather than empathy and sharing. And if there's one thing we know about future psychopaths, it's that they have a complicated relationship with empathy. So if you were the child gleefully melting Barbie in the microwave just to see what happens, you may have been running a preschool-level experiment in chaos, one that future you might not want to put on a resume. Number 5. The Creepy Stare Champion. You know those kids who don't just look at you, they scan your soul like a security checkpoint? You're sitting on the couch, minding your own business, and there's a 7-year-old silently watching you from the hallway. No blinking, no smile, just the kind of unbroken eye contact that makes you check if your will is up to date. Psychologists call this flat affect when combined with the right body language, minimal facial expression, reduced emotional reactivity, and that strange, unnerving calm in situations where most kids would squirm or giggle. While not always sinister, persistent flat affect in children can be linked to callous unemotional traits, the same cluster we mentioned earlier that's associated with psychopathy. In normal development, kids use facial expressions as emotional mirrors. They see your smile and reflect it back. They sense fear and react accordingly. But if the emotional mirroring software is glitchy, you get those unsettling, long stares that feel like they're studying you the way a hawk studies a mouse. Sometimes it's just shyness. Other times, the emotional radar is switched to off, and you're looking at an early sign of trouble. To be clear, Not every kid who stares like that is on track for a villain origin story. But let's just say if your childhood nickname was the little ghost because of your stare, you've at least got the vibe down pat. Number 4. The pain tolerance legend. Here's a scene. A kid falls off the monkey bars, scrapes both knees, and just walks it off. No tears, no complaint. No, I need a band-aid with dinosaurs on it. Meanwhile, every other kid in the playground acts like a paper cut is a medical emergency requiring at least 3 adults and a juice box. High pain tolerance in kids isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes they're just stoic. But in the context of emotional development, an unusually low reaction to injury or distress in others can be a red flag. Research shows that many children who later develop antisocial behaviors aren't just physically tough. They're emotionally numb to suffering, including their own. It's not the absence of tears that's alarming, it's the absence of any emotional shift. If you break your arm and laugh about it, or watch someone else get hurt and respond with meh, that suggests the brain's empathy systems aren't firing. Think of it like having a smoke alarm that only goes off if your entire kitchen is already engulfed in flames. Of course, if you were the kid who just didn't cry because you didn't want your friends to see you as weak, that's more about pride than psychopathy. But if you barely noticed pain at all, that's when things get interesting, and a little creepy. Number 3. The master of emotional imitation. Most kids are emotional oversharers. They broadcast joy, sadness, or rage with the subtlety of a car alarm. But some children learn early on that emotions are useful tools, not feelings to experience but buttons to push in others. These kids notice that if they pretend to be upset, they get comfort. If they fake happiness, people trust them more, and the more they practice, the better they get. Eventually, they're basically little method actors, but without the method. Psychologists have found that high-functioning child psychopaths often excel at what's called cognitive empathy, understanding what someone else feels, but lack affective empathy, actually feeling it. In other words, they can simulate emotions to get what they want, but they're not feeling those emotions themselves. This can make them charming and manipulative in equal measure, and it's one of the reasons adult psychopaths can be so convincing. They've been rehearsing since kindergarten. So, if your childhood self could cry on command, flash a perfect smile after being caught red-handed, or mimic your teacher's serious voice so well that other kids fell in line, you might have been a little too good at emotional theater, and not the wholesome, let's put on a play kind. Number 2. The animal bully. There's a big difference between a kid who accidentally steps on the cat's tail and one who enjoys it. Unfortunately, one of the most consistent predictors of future violent or antisocial behavior is cruelty to animals during childhood, and we're not talking about innocent toddler clumsiness, we're talking about deliberate harm, repeated over time. It's called the McDonald triad in criminology, a set of childhood behaviors, animal cruelty, fire setting, and chronic bedwetting, that have been linked, controversially but persistently, to violent tendencies in adulthood. Among these, animal cruelty tends to be the strongest signal because it reveals not just a lack of empathy, but an active enjoyment of causing suffering. In a healthy brain, seeing a creature in pain triggers distress signals, your mirror neurons fire, your heart rate changes, you feel that gut level, oh no. But in some children, those empathy circuits are quiet. Instead, the act becomes entertainment. Psychologists believe this can be an early rehearsal for aggression toward humans. It's practice without consequences. If you were the kid who tied tin cans to the dog's tail for fun, that's less about being mischievous and more about giving the FBI something to jot down for later. On the flip side, kids who protect animals, even tiny bugs, tend to develop stronger empathy skills over time. So the little girl who cried when her goldfish died, she's probably fine. The boy who laughed while putting ants in the microwave? Yeah, that one's worth a second look. Number 1. The Firestarter. Not the Stephen King kind, well, hopefully not, but the child who can't resist lighting something on fire just to watch it burn. A little fascination with matches or campfires is normal. Humans have been obsessed with fire for thousands of years. But when a kid repeatedly seeks out opportunities to ignite things, hides their behavior, and gets visible excitement from destruction, that's where the red flags start waving. Fire setting in childhood often overlaps with thrill-seeking, impulse control problems and, you guessed it, callous unemotional traits. The psychological appeal isn't just about the flames, it's about control, chaos, and power. Fire is dangerous, forbidden, and dramatic. For some kids, it's also a way to get attention or act out underlying aggression without confronting people directly. Neuroimaging studies have found that compulsive fire setters often show differences. In the brain's reward system, dopamine spikes in ways similar to gambling or drug use. The rush isn't in the warmth, it's in the rule-breaking. If you were the kid who accidentally set the trash can ablaze 3 times in one summer, that's not a quirky phase, that's your amygdala and prefrontal cortex throwing a what-if party without inviting your moral compass.